Then there is this reverse pattern where people are born in cloud, where they do everything on the PaaS platform, and then they think of going to virtual machines or seeing how I can integrate back with on-premises. So the first three patterns are cloud focused. The last two patterns are more on-premises focused. I'll start off with the geo disaster recovery on cloud, and then we will cover certain things. But I also want the session to be more interactive. So as and when you have questions, please feel to stop us and ask questions, and we can spend as much time as possible in the session. Then we can spend more time outside if you have more questions. But any questions right away? Okay, all right. So when you use this term GeoDR, the idea is that you have a problem where geo separation makes sense, either from a risk perspective or because of certain solution characteristics which mandate that you have at least 2 data centers. The term geo is used often in the sense of being able to respond to a geo failure, which is usually termed as natural disaster, the earthquake example. But what is more often happens is software failures happen, and the arrangement that you set up for a large scale region outage in fact helps more in individual software failures. So the second geo separated data center that you have is the failures that I see are more because of software failures rather than regional outages. But that's really the primary goal of a geo disaster recovery arrangement. If an entire region goes out for some reason, either because of connectivity or because of failure in an entire platform or some reason, you want a secondary data center somewhere else which can take the load. The primary motivator here is to have a highly available solution, one, and the second motivator is to recover from a disaster. Even though we call it as a GeoDR, most of my customers are motivated by having solutions which are more available rather than the disaster recovery aspect of a secondary data center. Like I said, region outage is primary motivation, but it looks like it helps for a lot of secondary scenarios which are not thought of initially, and once you have the arrangement, it's used heavily. And then you find that you can maybe do read-only workloads on the secondary region. You find that you can do a software upgrade by using the secondary region, switching over to the secondary region, doing a software upgrade there. You find that if an application deployment went wrong, then I can go to the secondary region, so on and so forth. Very often used in websites. Some of these are like published information. Some of them are things I can't talk directly about. But some of these are actually deep on SQL. We have, for example, Infosys.com, which I was helping the customer with, which is a disaster recovery arrangement, runs on SQL Server. I've helped the customers do this stuff on SharePoint, on BizTalk, and even custom applications. Websites are the kind of workload which seem to demand geo-disaster recovery more than anything else. It looks like people who use websites want availability to the highest possible level, and then a disaster recovery arrangement helps to shift users. In the case of BizTalk and SharePoint, it seems to be more of a disaster recovery arrangement rather than a availability pressure. When we talk about GeoDR, you typically have some application which is using the database, storage, or both, and then that application itself is highly available by having a application level load balancer or a cloud service which is like a virtual endpoint, then multiple instances of the application so that there is local. Yeah.
This sounds very rare, a region going down. In your experience, has it happened?
I think I said that it is rare, but it has happened in some of the customers. We have had, for example, a storage failure, right? it has happened once in about maybe 10 or 20 disaster failovers. So some of the customers have handled the failover itself to a disaster recovery arrangement has happened 20 times in a year. But out of that, there's probably one regional outage. So the remainder of the 19 times was what I was hinting at. Software deployment failure, application crash, virtual machine crash, or let's say something went wrong at the endpoint level, misconfiguration by an administrator, very, very common. So in those recoveries. And then I'll talk about something called transient failure, what is called as false negatives. False negatives also were responsible for some of those 20 transitions. Yeah.
And what are the reasons for the outages?
So regional outages happen for various different reasons. These are because let's say one particular deployment does something very bad, or something happens to the internal infrastructure, or there is a major connectivity outage, a whole series of cables and multiple redundant points all fail together or something like that. Very, very individualized, rare occurrences that cause those kinds of failures. Sure, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You gone to that scenario? Yeah, so there is basic protection for some of that. For example, if you use an availability set in Azure, then we ensure that there is separation between two machines in an availability set. They are in different racks, and there is some separation between the racks. AC power, UPS, network cables are all doubly redundant. So typically one AC, one UPS, etc. going down, or one network cable, one network provider going down, doesn't cause failures in Azure. But like he pointed out, it could be an administrator doing something wrong with maintenance or a hardware equipment failure. But that doesn't typically bring down an entire region down. It usually a cluster of servers that get affected by that kind of a failure. Yeah.
And on top of that, while all applications vendors are moving on to the cloud, as a platform, we definitely need a DR strategy to be in place. Like incidents like a cyclone, say a Katrina cyclone happening and wiping out the data center, those kind of scenarios you should be ready to handle as a platform. So there are various options, those are available within the platform itself.
So at the highest level, you'll have two levels of redundancy. One is an application virtual endpoint, so that you can bring in multiple servers there, and load can get, you can do either failover or load balancing. Secondly, there is a data replication arrangement. The data replication arrangement ensures that the data that is getting written keeps moving either periodically or continuously to a second place. These are at the highest level two mechanisms that will be in place for that. So the load balancing that is there at the application level typically happens at two places. One is within the high availability arrangement inside the data center, and then something else that gives you a virtual public endpoint at the top, which can basically vector the web traffic from one endpoint to the other endpoint should one endpoint fail.